Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
We talked about last time silence, right? The mama, this whole notion, what sounds are associated with vision and so forth. So now we're going to come. That was a big tangent. Okay. So now I want to come back to before we go back to the text, just some examples of other forms of vision. Very, very interesting vision. Isaiah and Ezekiel, okay? In chapter 6 of Yeshayahu, Isaiah sees a vision, but it's not clear where it's taking place. He's in a temple and he sees, as does Ezekiel, both have, and he sees the angel, and he doesn't see God, but he sees God's cloak hanging down. And the big question is the vision with him in the temple in Jerusalem, so that as it were, the vision from there, he has a vision of the divine temple in heaven, okay? The other possibility is God took him up. He actually, literally, his spirit in the vision was up there. Hard to know. Now, I'm not going to get into discussion. You can argue that either way. But anyway, that is where. So here's your first test of what is the most significant line that comes from that vision? I mean, there's a statement that comes from that Isaiah chapter 6 that everybody knows. Even the church knows.
Is it the holy, holy, holy one?
The what?
Isn't that where we get the holy, holy, holy one?
Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh.
Kadosh, 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 Hashem Svaot. Exactly. That's what the angels are singing. That's where it comes from. So that's a biggie. But yes, I see your hand. But the point is, and that actually, there's an element there where he is touched. He says, God says you're going to prophesy. He says, I can't, my mouth is not clean. So an angel comes down and touches his mouth. So this is a vision that actually results in activity that has an impact on him. And the same thing happened with Yechezkel, okay? Yechezkel, chapter 1, is the most elaborate vision of the divine presence. I mean, how many of you have studied Yechezkel? Anybody read Ezekiel chapter 1?
I've read it, but not studied it in depth.
Okay. No, because it's absolutely. See, I can't talk with my hands. Computer thinks I'm reading. All right. Anyway, yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable. He's standing on the Har-Kvar, the Kvar Canal in Bavel. So we know where he is. He's not taken up into heaven. Heaven comes down to him. Okay. And that's where we learn about the Chayot HaKodesh, all right? These four angels that actually comprise or carry the chariot on which God is sitting. And these are the angels that have, and they're described, their heads have four faces. Sound familiar? Anybody? Anybody remember what the four faces are?
Do you want us to guess? It could be four directions.
Don't waste time guessing. All right.
Look.
A human being, right? A lion, an ox, human being, lion, ox, eagle, right? What do they represent? And this is in his vision. I mean, this guy it's unbelievable how detailed and in living color, okay? So anybody want to take a guess? What's the common denominator of the four animals?
Strength.
Yes.
They're all apex predators.
What?
They're all apex predators.
No, I didn't get it. Is it Bernie? Is that you talking?
No, it was me, Leon.
Oh, Bernie.
Pinnacle predators.
Oh, Leon. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't say it again.
Apex predators are except the ox doesn't fit. The lion, the eagle, and the human, we are all apex predators. We have no one that hunts us, and we hunt everybody.
Yeah. Well, no, you're close, I think. These are the four creatures. I mean, power is the answer.
Yeah, and ox power.
Yes, they are the dominant, in other words, and they represent, okay, so humans are humans, created in the image of God with the mandate to rule.
Yes.
The lion is commonly known as the
king of the beasts.
right, and it's, I don't know if that term's biblical, but clearly, especially because he's got the big mane, right? Frankly, I think a big tiger versus a big lion, the tiger is going to have the upper hand, but that's neither here nor there. They didn't know from tigers. Anyway, but the point is, so the lion then is the most powerful of the wild animals. The ox is the most powerful of the
Domestic animals.
domesticated, and the eagle is the most powerful of the
Birds.
bird. All right. So it's power. Exactly. All right. So then, and the wings are described. Okay. They have wings so that they're always, their front and back are covered, and their wings, so they have two sets of 1, 2, 3, 4. So if they want, and it appears as if they're like the rook on a chessboard. They go this way, then that way, then this way. I mean, I don't know if they can go diagonal, but then the point is they're modest, right? Their bodies, where features that should not be exposed are covered, right? And then that kind of detail is part of the vision. And then the finale, he looks and there's the throne, and on the throne is an image that is like, how does it go? The image of a man is what it says. Okay, the image of, and you get the sense he doesn't want to. It wasn't fully an image, but it looked like an image, and that's really the closest you get in the Bible to something like that.
But maybe it's B'Tselem Elohim.
In a sense, yeah. I don't know the word is. I knew demut, which is like almost the same. Yeah, but you can see it's as if, excuse me, the prophet or whoever wrote that down was clearly trying to avoid, or the whole notion, you really can't see God, because if it was really a complete manifestation of God, Yechezkel would have died. And that principle, was already in existence before Yechezkel was. That concept, goes, we read that in Shemot with Moses on Mount Sinai, okay? So, anyhow, it's fascinating. But these are the point, and there too, because afterwards it says that a divine spirit entered into Yechezkel. So these are two, the common denominator are visions, but the visions sort of morph into real experience of a spiritual nature. Fascinating imagination, and the fact that they were written down, it's very, but and the whole notion, by the way, these texts that I'm referring are the foundation of the Merkavah mysticism, Talmudic age mysticism, that is a quasi precursor to Kabbalah, but it's these visions of sages who go up to heaven and they visit. They're up there and they see it blows your mind to get into it, too complicated. But you have one story in the Talmud of a man who goes up and it is more than a vision. He's taken up into heaven. He's shown around, and as a result, he comes back a heretic. Does that ring a bell with it?
It's the Pardes, isn't the four who in the Pardes?
Elisha ben Abuya, exactly. And what was I see a hand bird. And what was the cause? What was it up there that he saw that gave him?
Well, the story is that he saw Ken Hatzipor.
He what?
Ken Hatzipor.
Yeah, well, that was one.
But that happened on earth, not in heaven.
Yeah, the ones I remember, and there's a difference between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. He saw the tongue of Chespet, the interpreter, dragged in the dust. He saw somebody die when took the mother bird away from getting the egg, but doing it because of his father said so. That's mitzvot.
That's what Leon's talking about. Yeah. No, this is different. No, this is a spiritual moment that changed his belief in God. Bert, is that what you wanted to address? Or?
No, I'm still having.
All right, hold on. All right, wait, let me finish. Because he sees Metatron, who was the chief angel, up there, and all the other angels are bowing to him, showing him great respect and reverence. And over there is sitting God on his throne, higher up, clearly God, but all the angels are over here with Metatron. And when he comes back, he believes that there are two powers in heaven. And that was the theological step that he took that made him into a heretic. In addition to all the issues you're raising, challenge the morality of biblical law. But the whole point was, and what happened was, once he came back and started spouting that, all the sages dissociated.
Well,
Wait,
but
hold on.
not my ear.
Wait, Bert.
I'm still having trouble coming to terms with whether we are taking this literally or metaphorically. People with those kinds of visions in the 20th century right now are considered to be, at best, I don't even know how to put it, they would be medicated and put in an institution. But clearly, we have accepted these kinds of visions as part of our tradition. And I'm having trouble wrapping my head around that as to how in the 20th century we look at these, whether we think these people actually saw these things, and if they did, where do we put that? And before I ask for your answer, when you were talking about Kadosh, 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 many years ago I was in Prague, and those of you who may have been in Prague, there's a very famous bridge that goes across the river, and there's a large statue there of a guy on a cross, and above it there's Hebrew. And I look and I say, what does that say? And it says Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh.
I saw it. Absolutely. Yes, right.
Which I thought was a strange juxtaposition. But then again, he was Jewish.
Look, first of all, yes, people today would have difficulty with people, although, and I haven't experienced this personally, from time to time, we hear of people in different kinds of churches where they have visions, and they go to the church and they talk about it, and people say, wow.
Speaking in tongues.
Well, that's part of it. That's yeah, sort of. But the notion...
That's not part of Judaism, is it, at all?
It used to be, but not now. No. But I mean, that notion is still alive in the Western. But beyond that, I mean, today, I would venture to say most people. I mean, I don't know. I mean, look, depends. Clearly, we don't see. The rabbis solved that problem. No, this is serious. They ruled that the last prophet was Malachi, right, who lived around 400 or so. I don't know the thing his year, but that's where he's placed. And after that, there are no more prophets. And you shouldn't listen to a bat call, a heavenly voice, because the ultimate authority comes from Torah and from those who are expert in Torah. Now, you can say they ruled to strengthen their own position in the community.
The story of the Tanur.
And there was some that it's a reality, but that's okay. But they cut it off because there were too many Meshuggahs running around the post-destruction period talking about seeing visions. Josephus saw vision. He writes about it in the Jewish War of heavenly beings coming in, threatening, sign of impending doom. I think he thought himself to be a kind of latter-day Jeremiah. But I mean, that's what he writes about. So those were part of the ancient mentality. Today, I mean, I say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh with great zeal, because for me, it means that God is in a realm that is different, totally, radically beyond me. Because I'm not Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. I can't be Kadosh. I can try to be a little Kadosh and make that a part of my life. That's what it's about. But I cannot be like God. And that whole point was all of these traditions, as they piled on and move you into the early form of mysticism and the later one, clearly are trying to create the concept that when you're talking about God, you're talking about a realm that is beyond this. And carefully, it's the same thing. You can't study Kabbalah, right, until you meet certain requirements of maturity, because it'll drive you crazy, or it will mislead you. So these ideas were understood to be hot, even down as you go through the Middle Age and culture came. So I would say, yes, to me, they are spiritually poetic statements that remind me that when I should think about God, let that spirit, that concept draw it in. But ultimately, I am not that. That is radically different from me. Okay, Tybal and then Leon.
I just wanted to remind you that not everyone forsake him. His student Mayer never gave up on Aher. And somewhere, though I'm forgetting which chapter in Pirkei Avos, we even have a teaching. It's not a particularly meaningful or deep teaching, but in Pirkei Avos, we preserve the rabbis preserved a teaching from Aher.
They what?
In Pirkei Avos, there's a teaching from Aher.
Oh, Aher, yes.
I mean, so that's not everyone forsaking him.
No, but the point is that, remember, it came from before, because before he had that vision.
No, I disagree with you, because it says in the story that when they reach 1,000 amah, Acher turns in his horse and says to them, you have to stop here because it's Shabbat. And he continues riding on his horse, which means...
Yeah, but wait, but I'm saying, but that was before he had the vision of heaven or after?
To me, I thought it was after. Because
I think it's after, because he's already ostracized and he's worrying about his student Meir, that Meir might get into trouble if he's seen with Aher on a horse on Shabbos.
Yeah, but the point is, he can be sensitive to other people. He's still a human being, right? But his own approach could have been already altered, and that's why he was called Aher. But before it was altered, he was seen as a sage. Remember, he's one of the four who went to Pardes, and presumably those were four people who should have been able to experience it, right? And three, came out altered in different ways. The only one to survive was Rabbi Akiva. Right? And some suggest that may be actually a plunge into mysticism, but we don't know for sure. But clearly the Pardes was some kind of an esoteric experience. Okay, so can quote him from before he went cuckoo, but you still call him Acher.
Yeah.
All right, it's the same thing when Rabbi Meir and two of the rabbis, Rabbi Meir and another rabbi, were kicked out of the yeshiva by Shimon ben Gamli because they refused to stand when he came in the room because he was the Nasi. But these two guys were the two most brilliant scholars. Okay, so they say Acherim Omrim is one of them, and Yesh Omrim is the other one. These are terms that are used in the Mishnah. The point is, so they were given these names. It's like Acher. They couldn't mention the name, so they have these other pseudo names they give them. But there are stories told that when they came up, there was a question that was asked and a discussion took place, and no one knew the answer. Shimon ben Gamliel did. He was not the smartest guy, or was the Nasi, but not the smartest guy. So what did they do? They took a little note, wrapped it around a rock, and threw it out the window. And the two guys outside would discuss it. They would take it, write it on the other side, wrap it back up, and throw it back in. Okay. So, I mean, all these stories about people who push the edges. But these two sages this was a matter of the president of the academy, being insulted and taking revenge on the people who insulted him. All right. And so he told them to go outside. Okay. All right. Anyhow, visions. All right. Now Amos is going to undergo 5 visions, 3 in chapter 7, 1 in chapter 8, and 1 in chapter. And you will see there are different responses. There are 2 different kinds of response that when God speaks, Amos is going to respond for 2 of them one way, and then the response of the last 3 is going to be different, radically so. All right, so here we go. So Amos tells us that God appeared to him, and this is what he saw. This is the second part of verse 1. Yotzer govai bitchilat alot halakesh, that's a causal form. V'hi lekesh achar gizei hamelech. Okay, so there was a creation of locusts, Yotzer, in other words, out of nowhere, locusts came at the beginning of the latter harvesting of grain, okay? And we are right now, and that you've got to understand that whole period, basically between Pesach and Shavuot, was the period when there was great concern over the crop, because essentially the farmer had nothing to do, right? They were plowed, planted, everything was set up. They're growing and ripening. And this is, whatever, most of these are different varieties of grain. And at the certain end, you also have, fruit, the summer fruits, like figs. All right, anyhow. So one of the things they're concerned about, of course, is what came to be known as the Hamsin, right? The Sharav, the hot, dry wind that blow off the desert. And that's Sharav time. And it's very interesting. Hamsin, we think it means something to do with warm, right? You hear the word Ham. You know what it means? It's Arabic. It means 50. Does that number ring a bell?
Shavuot.
Exactly the biblical number. And that happens to be, and when you count the Omer, what you're doing, Rabbi Milgram, Alav Shalom, in his book on prophetic, on the priestly tradition, makes a point of saying it probably was in the minds of the people by counting the days of the Omer. It says you shall count 49 days. Yeah, Isla mentioned that at her bat mitzvah on Shabbos. 7 weeks, right? 7 years of 7 times 7, right? And the point is, by counting, you make you feel that you have a certain control, right? Okay, I made it through day 1. All right, now let's try day 2. Let's try day 3. You keep pushing and pushing, and the number gets smaller and smaller, and somehow you're given the feel that we're gonna make this. We got it. Of course, occasionally it did, and then you wonder, what did we do wrong? That's the mentality. But the point is, so that's what that is. But at this time, and I don't know the locust. When the timing of locust. All right. But it's interesting that it's mentioned that they come just at this. And the last line there is, and it was after the harvesting of the royal harvest. The royal harvest got it first, right? The king, the royal family, those guys got first cuts. So they were guaranteed their food. But it's the masses of the people that are suffering. See, that's what responding. But right away you can see the way he frames and see. It's basically saying, see, the system is rigged against the poor. The king and his entourage theirs is guaranteed. They get their food, but everybody else can suffer famine, and that's exactly what's supposed to happen. Remember, this is a vision. It's not the reality. And said, this is what's going to happen. God tells them, this vision that you have, that's what's going to happen. Okay, and of course, the locusts were legitimately a serious threat to crops. And you don't hear about it, but until a certain point in time, they came often. Okay, all right. So then, verse 2. All right, and so when the vision of the eating was finished, or rather, let's say, the consumption of the crop by the locust was done. At that now, so he's seen the full scope. So he says, Adonai Elohim, Slachna mi Yakum Yaakov ki katan, right? Mi Yakum Yaakov ki katanhu. Okay, he says, please forgive them, because how can Jacob arise? How can he be brought back? He's so small. Yaakov is a small nation, right? And it was a correct observation, because you can say, what is Amos talking? What's the problem by saying that Jacob, and remember Jacob is, what's Jacob's other name?
Israel.
Of course, so he's talking about the northern kingdom, the dominant kingdom, right? Okay, so he's saying it's so small and helpless, playing on God's compassion, all right? But the point is, it's so small. Well, what's the irony? At least from what is the irony in that statement?
It was the controlling kingdom and it was expanding.
Right.
But
it had that the area of the Israelite between Israel and Yehudah at that point had reached its largest extent. Okay? It was like 2.5, maybe 3 times what we normally consider, because they had conquered a lot of land. This is primarily due to the effort of the king of Israel, but also the king of Judah exercised some strength, even though Israel was the dominant of the two. But on this one, they worked together, okay? But the fact is, Amos ultimately is correct, because we've already seen he is aware of the fact that there is, to the north and east, an empire. Remember, we looked at the maps, right? A huge empire that slowly has been moving south. And that's on the basis of that wisdom on his part. And even though he never mentions Ashur, he never mentions, right? We talked about that last time. He doesn't. But nevertheless, what he's saying is, in actuality, small. But again, he's exaggerating. He's emphasizing, because he's calling God on, let this happen. The king gets to eat, and the people, this tiny people, you're going to let them. So what is he? Verse 3. Oh, I see your hand, Tybal. You just want to wrap this up. He says what? Nicham Adonai al zot, lo tihiyeh amar Adonai. Okay? He says to him, please change your mind. God does. Says, okay, this won't happen. He did a good job, didn't he? He was doing like Moshe. Moshe was playing on God's ego. So what will the nation say? What will the Egyptians say about you, right? But here he's talking about God. He's pulling on God's compassion, as God is. He says, okay, this won't happen. You're right. That's a very good point. The people will suffer. I don't want the people. Okay, Tybal.
Isn't there another kind of irony in that by using the name Yaakov rather than Yisrael, it's a reminder of the covenant and the strength, what is large and what is small in terms of measures other than the size of land or how numerous peoples are. It's a different kind of measure. I mean, so if you look at the covenant and what it's supposed to be, that's the people that would be the farthest from small.
Yeah, that's possible, yes. In other words, how shall we put it? Yeah, right, Jacob, yeah. I mean, if you look at the history of Jacob, except for the fact that he made himself into a wealthy guy because he knew how to raise sheep, but he himself says that he had a miserable life. Remember, Pharaoh asks, how are you? I'm old. I've had him, and he did. He was beaten around. So it could be that he's just Jacob who had to run away. He also got himself into trouble, right? In the end, he ended his life at least surrounded. So it could be, yes. Okay, now the second, verse 4. All right, now the second vision. Ko hirani Adonai Elohim. Remember, really, it's Adonai Yud He Vav He, because it says Yud He Vav He, but we read it. All right. V'hinei korei lariv ba'esh Adonai Elohim v'tochal et tahom rabah achla v'chela. Behold, sovereign is coming lariv for an argument in fire. It will eat the deep water. V'tochal tahom. What's the tahom rabah?
Made tehom.
Yes. Tell Leon.
The water. But I found it strange because I looked it up and I even did an AI search, and it doesn't usually happen that way. Fires cannot directly affect the water that is, the deep water under the ground. Right. It can be affected differently by making the land on top of it waterproof, which means the water just slinks off and doesn't feed the underground water. But other than doing it indirectly, it does not directly affect it like it kind of indicates here.
So what is this saying?
It's saying that even your be'er mayim, your water sources are going to disappear.
Correct.
You're going to be thirsty.
Yes. But in other words, what you're saying is for this to happen is unheard of.
Correct.
But it can happen because God is God.
That's true.
And remember, the Tahom was part of the world, the universe, before the actual organizing and creation in chapter 1.
Yeah, the dark side of God, Hoshech.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to go there. All right. Anyway, yeah, all that's chaos. I mean, basic Tahom, the deep water. This is the waters under the earth, and yes, that's where the well water came from. Okay, and sometimes even you could even see that in the depth of the ocean. because there are storms, where the wave, I don't know if they realize, where it's the wind that's pushing the water in, but it's coming out of that deep, and remember, the Mediterranean Sea, it's not just the Tehom manifests itself not only in the wells, but in the Mediterranean itself, because it's throughout history, it was known to be a dangerous ocean to travel when there is a big storm. And when those waves, the tides come in, the people on the land are getting the impression that Tehom is opened up right down below. It's pouring out from down below as well. And that's like with the flood. Remember, the flood, the trapdoors, the sluices in heaven opened up and the water came pluck, and the water from below came up, okay? And that's the point. So, but the fire, we're talking about the fire though, but that's the thing. This is not normal ash. This is an explosion of ash that is unheard of. And it literally destroys the natural order and cause great damage. And the last line is ve'achla v'chelek, and it'll eat up the land. So if the locust, okay, because God pulled back on, but now he's vision of this fire that God made, okay? And this is really horrible. So now the field is going to be burned. And now again, verse 5, it's the same line all over again. He's saying to God, oh no, will Jacob survive? They're so small. And so again, what does God do? God says, okay, I won't. All right, but now there's a shift, and we're going to have to spend some time. Verse 7, Kol Hirani, V'hinei Adonai nitzav al chomat anach, uviado anach. This is a vision. But here now, look what he's saying. God is standing on a wall, and there's an anach, a chomat anach, a wall somehow affected by an anach. An anach means probably a plumb bob, a plumb line. You know what that is? A plumb line. Can you give me a minute? I left it in.
A plumb line is a line that's dropped in order to make a straight line when you're working on something.
Exactly.
You drop from a wall to make sure that you got things lined up correctly.
That is correct.
Rashi explains it exactly that way. You take a piece of string and you put a lead at the bottom, and it hangs and creates a straight vertical line. That's the way that Rashi explains it, and everybody has taken it from him. The fact is, the word doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible, which is the problem.
Yeah, but it appears in life. We've used it in doing work in the house here.
Yeah. By the way, Bert, it was something that I wanted to say before. We are so conditioned to being rationalists that we forget that there is more to life than that. If you want to be completely rationalist, remember Gödel's proof, which proves that in any system, there are going to be theorems you cannot prove.
No, I don't doubt that. And I do believe that there are many things that are beyond rationality. I was just making the point that to 20th century people, these kinds of very specific visions are considered outside the realm
Psychotic.
Of normal, well, yes.
Normal experience. All right. So here is an artist's rendering of an Egyptian plumb line from 1300 BCE. You see it? The string or rope and the object at the end with the point. All right, so that's set up on top of the board there to make sure that it's aligned properly, right? Because if it weren't, then, and it's often hung on a 90-degree angle, so you can visually tell very quickly if it's misaligned, okay? So that's what it looked like 1300 BC.
It looked the same thing now in 2025.
How right you are!
They haven't changed.
There is this is available for purchase right now. You want to buy this plumb? I'll tell you where to go. It's one of the largest hardware chains in the country.
Ace or Home Depot.
Home Depot. Anyway, all right. So that's what this is. And so there is a debate among scholars. What does this mean, chomat anach? Okay, because the problem is chomat is the construct, and it usually is attached to a wall of something. All right, so you would say a choma of chomat levanim. right? A wall of bricks, okay? But here, how can you have a wall made of an anach? What are they? It's made up of plumb bobs? No, it's just the way it was formulated is a wall that was properly aligned by a plumb bob, okay? And it's in the grammar here is a little bit unusual. That's okay. Amos lived in the 8th century. We've already seen that there are uses of language in him that did not all work or were not consistently maintained subsequent. So that's what this is saying. But there is also an anach, hand, all right? So that is the anach. But the interesting thing here is you see him standing on a wall. God is standing. We'll get back to that in a second. Bert, very quickly.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if God was going to be standing somewhere, ostensibly God is pretty heavy. And no, what I'm getting from this is the plumb line is that this wall is really straight.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is.
Very special.
It's appropriate for God to stand
It's
up.
appropriate for God, although God would not fall off a wall if it were not straight, but...
Right. I think you may be overthinking the prophet, but that's okay. It's the whole point.
I had a vision.
That's great. Okay. You see, you can still do it. What are you going to do? All right. Okay. Yeah. But I mean, so think for a moment. Do you know of other situations where God actually appears somewhere and is possibly? Now remember, this is a vision, okay? So therefore, this is not a real thing. Got it? Okay, Rena.
I mean, it seems to me a lot of this chapter is hearkening back to Breshit in the creation, and God was seen in Gan Eden, arguably, when he comes out to say, where are you?
Right. Well, he wasn't seen, but
he could have been.
He was. They heard him coming because the trees were moving. Right. So it wasn't a visual, but it was a quasi-physical presence. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's when that happened. That's when they got worried, right? Because they heard him coming. Okay. Good. But that wasn't the visual. That's all.
Okay.
It's different, right? But yeah. It is more than just an obscure presence, right? It's literally moving things around, right? Good. Another time, okay, Tybal?
When you asked us the question, were we supposed to think of the burning bush?
Oh, that's a very good one.
That's what I was thinking
Except the difference is it was a fire, and the divine presence was seen within the fire, right? But that would be the same as the fire and the smoke that led the Israelites through the wilderness, right? So already God's covered. That's what I'm trying to get at, right? He didn't see God standing. He saw fire, and the voice came out of the fire. So the divine presence, as it were, was in the fire, but it was being covered over by the fire. So he didn't see God. Right? He doesn't have a sense. He hears God. So it's a little bit different. But it's verging on that, and it's a sort of a quasi-materialization of the divine presence. All right, on the other one, yes, Rena.
So Tybal's comment just reminded me of when Moshe asks to see God's face, and God only shows him his back.
Right. Okay, we'll get to that. That is a very special, yes. And there's another one before that. But one of the lost accounts of God's presence is in Shemot, chapter 16, where you have the man. No, not the man. Sorry. There it says the kavod appeared. By the way, chapter 17 with the manna. It says the the kavod, God's kavod, was there for the people to see. Now that's the kavod, which is presumably a non-physical type of a thing. We don't know what it is. But the chapter before that, when Moses hits the rock for the first, and God tells Moses, okay, go such and such a place, there's a rock, and bring the elders with you, and you will see, and I will be there. He says, I will be there standing on the rock. That's what he says. They go, he hits the rock, and fine. The question is, it doesn't say. but he says, I'm going to be there. It doesn't say my kavod will be there. He says, I'm standing on the rock. Was he seen or not? But there's a mention. But there are two others, however, one. Before that happened, 10 chapters early in Exodus 4, we've talked about before. God tells Moses, he, Aaron, and his son, and the 70 elders, up part of the way up the mount to have lunch. Basically, it is a meal of the culmination of the covenanting. Before this, Moses, he reads the law. He sets up 12 matzevot, stones, sprinkles blood on them, symbolizing the consecration of the tribes for the covenant, and the people accept the covenant. And then, as it were, the elders, Aaron and his family, and Moshe, go up the mountain to break bread with God. It says, and they saw God, and beneath his feet.
Shimona, close the door over there, please.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I turned it off.
Okay.
Thought I muted myself.
And we thought we heard the voice of God.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Anyway, so the point is, myself back in. Right. So they see his feet. And beneath the feet is like a blue slab of something precious. That's what they saw. It says they ate and they did not die. Now, all it mentions that they saw, the feet, it doesn't say anything else above it. But it's interesting. It explicitly, Exodus chapter 24, they saw, which means under normal circumstances, they would have died God because of the moment God let it. But again, we don't know anything more about what they saw. But so this notion, we are so this concept that you can't see God, can't look, and then of course you have in Vayikra in chapter 16 with the whole ceremony on Yom Kippur, right? And Aaron goes into Mishkan, smoke. Why does he have the smoke? See, the present, he sprinkles the blood. All right, so this whole notion, it's clear that there are some times when, it seems compromised. And I can't explain it. It may be timing, the evolution of the concept, given the fact that stories, tradition, evolve over centuries, that there were times it was a big deal. Other times before that, maybe it wasn't so much. I'm not gonna put, but he almost getting back here. So he says, God showed me, and Adonai is still the Choma. But again, this is a vision. But what it was of God that Amos saw, but clearly he was not harmed, whatever it was. Okay, Bert.
I was just going to say, but by the time we get to the Middle Ages, with Maimonides, who said God had no corporeal body that you really could see, and then the Ein Sof of the Kabbalah, the whole idea of, quote, seeing God in a actual sense doesn't seem to exist.
Well, but when you go to Kabbalah, you don't.
Well, isn't the Ein Sof something that's way beyond?
That's right.
You can see emanations of God. You can see the shadow, the footsteps on the beach, as it were, but you can't see the person who made them.
Oh no, but 10 Sfirot that are the lower emanation of God.
Right.
It's not that they're visible; they're spiritually accessible.
Right. They're the effect.
Well, no, it's more than the effect. They are extension of God. That was the whole controversy. The reason, one of the problems that rabbis in the Middle Ages had with, not just talking philosophers, the problem with is it looked like something like two powers in heaven. It wasn't, because it was sort of if you know Neoplatonism, all right, and believe me, I'm not a Neoplatonist. It's a very ancient philosophy, right? But the whole notion, Neoplaton, the basic premise behind the theology is that the one who is the supreme deity, that would be the Ein Sof, untouchable, unreachable, totally spiritual, right? A concept, spirit, whatever you want to call it. If that's the case, how did that create a physical world? Okay, and so what evolved, step-by-step emanation of elements that eventually increase in their reality until you got down to the physical world where we live, which is material, okay? And so that was their way of rationalizing a single deity who is the creator, okay? And this was not necessarily just Christians or just philosophers. And Aristotle, of course, threw the whole thing out because for him it was totally irrational. And Aristotle's perspective was there is no creation. There is a supreme being, but the supreme being does nothing. Motion exists because the lower elements of creation seek higher levels of knowledge. And it's all a hierarchy. Earth, moon, sun, moon, stars, etc., okay? And then you have the unmoved mover, okay? And what generates motion? The yearning of the lower element to learn, to get knowledge of a higher level than itself. So we on earth seek the knowledge that exists in the moon. Okay? The moon is another level of intelligence. It's got physicality, but there's also intelligence. We would seek that. Okay, that would seek the sun. The sun and the process, this whole process of searching and searching and searching, they believed generated motion. That's why the planets move. That's why this happens and that happens. And on Earth, it's not simply motion. It's motion on the Earth itself, right? Plants, animals, okay, volcanoes. There's motion here in the Earth. They didn't know whether or not there was any kind of motion like that up there because they couldn't see anything, right? Anyway, that's the point. So Aristotle said, no, everybody seeks that which is higher. What does God do all day? He thinks and thinks and thinks and thinks. And he doesn't move. He's non-movable. It's a principle, it's a concept, it's something beyond our comprehension. Okay. Anyhow, so getting back down to earth, literally. So he has this vision. Now, the other interesting thing, what's in God's hand? An anach, right? A plumb bob in his hand. All right. Now, look what he says. Verse 8. Vayomer Adonai, God said to me, Ma tareh Amos, Omar anach. So God said to me, what do you see? And he says, I see an anach. I see a plumb bob. Vayomer Adonai, hineni sam anach bekerev ami. I'm going to put an anach in the midst of my people Israel, Ami Israel. Lo osif od avorlo. I will not pardon them anymore. He ran out of pardon. It's a vision. He's saying, don't try to talk me out of it. The door is closed. Yep. That's how bad it got. But look how he's going to frame it. Next line. Because now you're going to see what's going on. The nashamu bamot yischak umiktadei Israel yecheravu v'kamti al beit Yeravam b'charev v'nashamu, that they will be utterly destroyed. Who? Bamot Yitzchak, the Bamot of Isaac. Now Yitzchak is an alternate form of Yitzchak. You can see the sound is the same. But by the way, the name Yitzchak appears only 4 times in the whole Bible. Twice here in this discussion, and twice, once in Jeremiah and once in. Now, where I have not seen anybody that can fully explain how and why this happened. Clearly, it was an evolution of the sound that early, before it became stabilized with that tzadi. But you can see how a scene would be used in context. It's the same sound, right? So that's what, but only 4 times. But it's interesting because the usages in Jeremiah and Psalm are for positive things, celebratory. And here, it's part of this horrible curse is making. It's mentioned here, and later on, as we'll see, a verse. Okay? All right. Now, what are Bamot?
The high places where all the idols used to be.
Yes. So the Bama, well, it's not. Yeah, that's the general assumption. The assumption being what they were at best were Israelite sites that were local shrines, and some of them probably were actually functioning properly. Many of them, that's the point. Many of them had repurposed pagan elements that were part of the worship and others probably absolutely included things that were clearly forbidden, okay? Absolutely forbidden. I've talked about one. My favorite, Bama. Remember the fortress in Arad with the 2 stones? Remember? Anybody remember? Remember? Forgot. 2 stones. A taller one and a less tall one. 2 incense altars. Not 1, 2. Inside a mini temple in a fortress that was Israelite 100%. Built sometime after 800 in the south in Arad. And there was a family there. They found the name of one of the families from the temple in Jerusalem on a shard in that little temple, okay? In a fortress, all right? What do the stones represent? God and God's wife, Hashem ve'asherato.
That's assuming that Hashem is not female.
No, that's irrelevant. That wasn't in their radar screen. All right, okay. That is paganism. Two gods, not one. And again, there are scholars who will think, well, no, it can't really be a god because it could just be, whatever. If you have an incense altar that is designated for a matzeva, for a standing stone, then you are offering a sacrifice of incense, and you only offer sacrifices of incense to God. Well, clearly, the Israelites who set that up from Judah were doing something pagan. It wasn't just a vestige, it was acted pagan. Now, that structure, I don't know if Amos knew about it. Remember, he from Judah. Whether he was aware of that structure out in the desert? I don't. But the fact that he lived in the middle of the 8th century and that this structure at the fortress in Arad was built sometime in that period clearly he knew of such places. And so what he's saying now, that wasn't Israel, that was Judah. All right, but now there could have been all over the place. Anyway, so those are the bamot. Those are bamot. And he says, so they will be destroyed. Umikdashei Yisrael yecharavu. Now notice again, it's not mikdash, it's plural, right? So this could be a reference not to the bamot, but to the two temples. Well, here we're talking the two Batei Kadoshim. It's plural of Israel. Yes, they will be destroyed. So that's what's going to happen. But then he says, "V'kamti al Beit Yeravam b'charav," and I'm going to rise up against the dynasty of Yeravam with a sword. Excuse me. So that's powerful medicine. Now, what's the difference between this punishment and the previous two? And why is this something that God will not release?
The previous one seemed almost natural causes. This one is directly from God.
Right. So that's one. Good. What else? Bible.
The sword word is very specific.
It is.
But there is something else, I think. The measuring stick. There is a definite measuring stick that they're being judged by, which is not in the others.
Good. And it's a wall, a hard wall. A hard wall.
A hard wall.
And that's what representing where God is coming from. His is the hard wall, the power that he has in his anach. And to me, the anach, this image, the hammer throw in track and field, the ball on the chain that they spin around and around, and right? Then they let it fly. The strongest guy gets it out the farthest. This is not the shot put. The shot put is different, right? You know what I'm talking about? Ever seen it?
Yes, one you
Yes, it's very
twist
hard.
and the other one you turn.
It's a very hard thing to do. Anyhow, but imagine this God. So God's got this huge anach, right? On a huge chain. He flings it around and around and around and lets it go against the temple in Beit El, right? And what does it do to the walls of that temple? It crushes the building. And then he picks it up. I see your hand, Rena. He picks it up and then he goes up north and he goes to Dan and he bam, and he goes to Shomron, to Samaria. And there was also a palace in Beit El, because it was a royal city as well as a royal temple. We'll read about that later. So that's what he's going to do. But notice the radical difference in the prophecies of Amos. Who is the primary target all the time? What element in
the north?
What?
The north.
No. What element in the north is the main target? What group?
Of the elites.
The elite.
Yeah.
Rich.
Healthy, the government, right? The king.
The rich.
The rich. Yes.
There is one thing that bothers me. He says, "Lo osif od avorlo." He's talking about himself.
Yeah, I'm not going to forgive it. I'm going to
let it. So avor is to forgive here.
No, I'm not going to let it pass. Look at it that way.
Yeah.
You lo over alav.
All right, because I thought maybe God wasn't going to pass over the wall.
I'm not going to let it pass. That's the best way to. It's gonna happen. I gave you a pass on 1 and 2.
Yeah, but not on 3.
But not here. No pass on this. You're going to get it. But the point is, it's a difference. Amos was able to talk God out of the first two because it was dealing who was going to suffer. The masses of the people would suffer from those. And that pulled on the compassion strings of God. He forgave. He said, okay, I'm not going to do. This is specifically focused, this particular one, on the highest level, which in his mind was totally corrupted. Okay? All right. And so this is a completely different realm. All right. Okay, we're going to stop here because the next one, because of what he just said, I'll give you the Vorspeise. What he just said was aimed at the priests, the temple, and the king, specifically, right? The dynasty of Yeravam. Now, scene switches. In verse 10, we'll see Amaziah, the high priest, goes to the king and says, Amos is yelling and screaming about you. And then begins a dialogue, Amos and Amaziah. Shalom Spiegel, to teach it years ago, wrote a book, a little pamphlet called Amos verses, and he analyzes these two verses fast so that all you'll see they're very, very, read ahead in verses 10 to 7. It ends very, very tragic. All right, so that's it. I shall see y'all next week. We shall move forward.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.